Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. He removed the towel and his penis was just barely hanging on. Paramedics and EMTs, what was the creepiest case you've dealt with? One particular call that I remember was getting dispatched to a 96-year-old female with rectal bleeding. It was almost 6 a.m. and when we entered the residence, the woman was yelling "He raped me," over and over again. Finally, the story came out that she had gone outside to get her paper, and some guy had emerged and followed her inside, raped her anally, stole all her medications, and then fled. I can't give away too many details, but I certainly believed what she was saying. We were trying to convince her to go to the ER, and she was adamant that she would not go. We kept pressing her and then she said, "My son's funeral is in 4 hours. I can't miss it." That moment really hit me hard. Never followed up with it. We responded to an apartment building when the caretaker had called us. His initial report was that he went to check on a suite because water had been reported flooding into the hallway. He informed us there was a deceased lady in the tub. He said he saw her and immediately backed out without touching anything. We entered the suite. It was filled with steam. The humidity had started peeling the paint off the walls and sheets. There was also the smell of cooked meat. Upon entering the bathroom we found the supposed deceased, seated in the tub, with the hot water running. From the looks of it she had been there a while. The skin on her body, all the way from toes to sternum, had started separating. Much like the paint on the walls, it was bubbled and coming up in sheets. I checked for vitals while someone turned off the water and the others went to get a bag and radio for a can. When a body is badly decomposed, we put them in a sheet metal box. I almost pooped my pants when I found signs of life. The lady had a pulse. She wasn't really responsive, but she was breathing shallow, had a heartbeat, and was looking at us. We had to get her out. We radioed for EMS and informed them we had a live patient with at least 80% burns. They were a few minutes out, so we started to get the patient ready for transport. I don't remember what we were doing when we noticed the water draining from the tub. But what we saw was her torso essentially degloving itself as the water receded. We immediately plugged the bathtub and continued working her. When EMS arrived we had to transfer her to the stretcher. That's where things got ugly. We planned to gently lift her out of the tub, and place her on the stretcher. However, as soon as we touched her, her skin was coming off in sheets. I remember saying, "Sorry ma'am, but we have to do this," as I picked up my section and came away with almost all of the skin I contacted stuck to my arms. That was the only time she made a sound. She probably couldn't feel it due to the nerve damage, but I'm pretty sure she knew she had lost almost all of her skin from the chest down. The water was still extremely hot, so we were also getting burned while doing this. We managed to get her onto the stretcher and EMS took her away. When the bathtub was drained, there was a sheet of skin stuck to the bottom. We had to scrape it off and bag it. I still can't eat certain chicken dishes because of this. We figure she was in the tub and the water got cool. So she turned it on with her toe. She must have had a stroke and could not turn it off again. Being an apartment, it had pretty much unlimited hot water. So that poor lady sat there for approximately 3 days, cooking. She did not survive. We don't get a lot of follow-up on calls, but I heard she passed away. Between a stroke and severe burns, it wasn't likely that she'd make it. But we treat every patient like they have a chance. The human body is a weird and wonderful thing. Sometimes people do make it through some pretty terrible things. A majority of the cases that some people would consider creepy would be ones with schizophrenic patients laughing and talking to people who aren't there. Watching someone experience full-blown visual and auditory hallucinations can be pretty creepy. We did have one call where we picked up a patient who claimed they were being tracked by the US government. Of course, nursing staff and everyone involved assume that it's just some kind of delusion run-of-the-mill psych patient case. He spent time talking about documents that he previously had access to, and how the government didn't want him to release the information to anyone. He yelled and screamed as we put him on the cot about being sane and that we were being brainwashed. As we loaded our patient into the rig, he says we'll be followed to the next facility. Jokingly, my partner asks what was going to follow us, which he replied with a black Lincoln Town car. As we leave almost immediately there was a black Town car behind us, which stayed behind us for the roughly 15-minute transport, and only disappeared as we got within a few blocks of the new facility. Dropped the patient off and all he had was a smug "I told you so" look on his face. Had a call around 9 o'clock just after I came on duty of an elderly male with possible high fever. Not a whole lot of info as the caller was his elderly wife who according to the dispatcher was hard to understand. Anyway, we head out get there 7 minutes or so later. As we go in, the wife is sitting at the kitchen table just inside the door, so we ask her what's going on. She answers that he has been complaining he is too hot all morning. We go into the next room, which is dark due to curtains covering the windows, but there is enough light to see a dead man sitting in a chair. Now mind you, he was not recently dead. I'm talking blackened face, rotten rat bites around the mouth, wasn't complaining this morning type of dead. I set down my equipment and my partner goes to turn on the light next to his chair so we can verify the obvious. As she goes to reach for the light, the dead man groans and reaches for her hand. After collectively crapping our pants, we jump into action. Come to find out, he was on oxygen and a smoker. He was complaining about being hot because he was literally burning up. What looked like signs of death on his face was scorch marks and melted plastic. And to answer the obvious question, I don't know. He was still alive when we got him to the hospital, and I never asked what happened to him after that. Not a paramedic, but I am a firefighter and therefore a first responder. This is the story of how I responded to a call involving the Antichrist. I was just getting off of work when a call goes out across dispatch saying that there was a possible overdose and that we needed to respond. We get to the scene and note nothing out of the ordinary. Until we enter the home. After asking where the patient is, we're escorted to a back room with a man exiting and rebuttoning his pants. We enter the room to a sheriff's deputy detaining a petite, naked woman who has attempted to jump out a window and has crapped herself. She had flung both blood and crap everywhere. She tells her mother, the owner of the home that's been very helpful, that she has a parasite inside her and that she doesn't blame her mother for letting her father rape both of them. The paramedics then enter the scene and attempt to administer sedatives via IV to calm this woman who has claimed the only drugs she is on are Prozac and a little weed. The most memorable moment came next. In the moment that the deputy released her hand to the paramedics to administer the IV, the patient slides her entire hand into her rectum. She then begins to spasm violently and tell us if we don't stop being racist she will smite us because she is the Antichrist, the harbinger of the end times. It all ended when I was given a second pair of handcuffs to bind her ankles. I was in the metaphorical blast zone of the Antichrist's butt, and therefore terrified for my life. All went well thankfully and I was spared the brown death. I was then called back to let the paramedics handle her. To this day I've never dealt with anyone quite like the Antichrist. First run I ever had. We got a call for a pedestrian hit by a dump truck on the highway. Got there and there was a black Subaru on the shoulder with the driver's side door open and a note taped to the steering wheel that just said, "I'm so sorry." This 24-year-old girl had committed suicide by jumping in front of a dump truck going 70 miles per hour. The first time I ever had someone dancing naked and bloody on the top of a police car during a psychotic breakdown was an eye-opening experience to a rookie. That guy got his blood all over me and ruined my new jacket. He kept staring at me maniacally, constantly repeating random numbers and saying, "I am Satan" over and over again. It's kind of weird how quickly that sort of run or call becomes routine. I had another psych patient early in my career that sticks with me for gross out factor. She was an Asian lady in her 60s but swore that she was a 15-year-old girl. She would keep saying the most morbid and grotesque things over and over. I don't remember exact details, but she did talk about being raped repeatedly and having her skull caved in that morning. Then she started going on about how, "I've been bleeding out of my vagina every single day for the last 3 years. I asked her if she was currently bleeding because vaginal hemorrhage is a legitimate medical complaint, and who knows, she very well could have been raped. At that point she removed a bloody maxi pad and threw at me, smacking me square in the chest. My partner erupted in laughter and said, "Dude, that is the most disgusting thing I have ever seen." On a Halloween about 4 years ago I was working a shift with a good buddy of mine and we got a run for an unknown medical. We were a couple of cocky mid-20-somethings. On the way up the elevator we got caught up in an argument over A's versus Giants Bay Area baseball. We almost blew off the security guard when he was opening the door to some random apartment. "Oh, she's definitely dead," the guard said, and we were instantly like, "What?" Usually the cops get to this sort of thing before us, plus we had no idea a dead body was involved. Yet there she was, reclined in a lazy boy, with her feet up all the way in a position of comfort. Her eyes were rolled back and mouth agape just like in the movies. Over her head was a translucent plastic bag taped neatly around her neck. I don't know if it was the combination of reclined death in a lazy boy, a nonchalant plastic bag, a possible murder, or the fact that it was Halloween. But that was a creepy scene. I think we actually had a shooting and a stabbing on that shift as well. In general, the creepiest calls for me are hangings. Something about a body just hanging listlessly in the dark. The last one I had We were dispatched to without lights and sirens, which itself was weird. We ended up at a Safeway with a bunch of cops who had no idea where the hanging was. Apparently, the guy who called it in was casually shopping in the produce section. This guy mentions to us the body was at the construction site across the street. Needless to say, we told the guy to show us where now. Sure enough, there was a well-executed hanging about 5 feet of the ground. Good rope rigged over a facade and tied to cement blocks on the other side of a chain-link fence. Seeing a dead body hanging in the dead of night is one of those things that stays with you. You keep it in your back pocket so you can tell the story later when someone asks about the job. This was one of my rookie calls. Probably like the 4th or 5th one I ever had. We got a call for a male in his early 30s with heavy groin trauma, exact words of the dispatcher. We roll up lights and sirens and the guy is waiting for us on the front step with a towel over his crotch. We barely come to a stop and the guy is already running towards the rig holding this towel. I asked him what was wrong and he moved the towel and this guy's penis was just barely hanging on. Apparently he had lady problems, so he decided to fornicate with the food mixer he had in his kitchen and accidentally turned it on. So we get him in the rig and it was bleeding everywhere and I had to stop it, so I do the best I could, and tried not to cause any more damage, because it was so bad. I thought if we hit a bump too hard, this guy's penis was gonna come off. I'll never forget my partner was dying laughing in the front of the rig the entire way to the hospital. Kinda heard a chuckle, so I look in the mirror and tears are just streaming down the guy's face. He can barely hold it in, he was laughing so hard. He tried his best to remain professional, but it didn't really work. I have had a lady with open sores all over full of maggots. A woman poured herself in gas and burned to death. A guy get decapitated in a Jeep wreck going the wrong way on the interstate. A crapload of shooting deaths. A 9-person shooting. I saw a guy jump out of a 9-story window. He didn't bounce. Burned up people are probably my least favorite. Friend of mine is new at a station. It's late at night and they hear a weird ringing. Being the new guy, it's on him to go find out what is making the sound. Eventually discovers it was the doorbell. He goes to the front and opens the door. I'll call him Alex. Alex, I need help here. Rest of station, you got it. Alex, no, I need help. It was a girl, bound in duct tape at the wrists, ankles, and around her mouth. She was also bleeding from the arms. She motioned under her skirt. They look under her skirt and her vagina had been staple gunned repeatedly. Curse words were carved into her arms. They get police there. My buddy said it would have been the best time to commit a crime, because every cop was there. Turns out, she had a history of faking kidnappings, and self-destructive behavior, with an escalating trend. She did it all to herself. Same friend of mine at the station gets called to a KFC for a vaginal bleed. He goes into the KFC, and a dude hands him a bucket. He holds the bucket and goes into the bathroom where the patient is. Patient had a miscarriage, tells him to look in the bucket. He looks in the bucket. No longer wants to go to KFC. I haven't specifically asked my paramedic best friend about his creepiest cases. But the most horrifying thing he's ever told me was an instance where a pedestrian was hit by a large vehicle and his bus was called in. When he attempted to start CPR, the guy's chest squelched under his hands. He looked like he was in one piece, but his torso was basically tenderized into gelatin by the impact. I responded to a call where a janitor was cleaning a quite large stone cross in the middle of the church. He had been up on a ladder cleaning, when he slipped off the ladder and proceeded to try to hang onto the cross to keep from falling. Unfortunately, the weight of the around 200-pound man was too much to support. The cross fell towards him, landing on his left arm, with a part of the horizontal stone of the cross pushing his muscles and tendons out of his wrist like a squeezed toothpaste tube. Then the cross fell completely on him, splattering his brain across the floor. Quite disturbing, and definitely the most horrific and gore-filled call I had ever witnessed. Police officer here. If a paramedic goes on a creepy call, we usually show up too. Worst I ever saw was a suicide via slit wrists. This woman was clearly struggling mentally. She went into her basement and started sawing at her wrists horizontally with a rusty hacksaw. Bleeds a good amount, and then starts walking around the house. She wasn't dying quick enough, so she sat down in a chair in the middle of the living room, and started going at her wrists again, this time with a pair of scissors. I was the second person inside the house. It looked like a massacre. We searched the house top to bottom, fully expecting to find multiple dead bodies in there. I've never seen so much blood in my life. Every single room had a trail of blood in it. The woman was found on a chair in the living room. Rigor mortis had contorted her body into a really strange, unnatural pose, and her face was haunting. Literally the stuff of nightmares. Her wrists had huge chunks of skin, veins and muscle missing from them. Saying she slit her wrists is inaccurate. She ripped them to pieces. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more gory videos like this. Thanks to any EMT, nurse, paramedic and cop who is listening. You guys do an amazing job and I respect you a lot for doing these things. Anyway, please share your stories in the comments below.